So as far as the characteristics of an abuser, like some of the patterns that we see and other patterns, those cyclical patterns that you see reoccurring, can you share?
Absolutely. So as far as the cyclical patterns, what happens is we start off, everything is going all right, and then the tension starts to build. And so as the tension starts to build, we may notice that our partner seems more irritable, things are tense. There may be smaller little outbursts or irritability or aggression or controlling behaviors that we're noticing. And then that buildup leads to the actual overt abusive episode or outburst, or something that is a bit more tangible, something that we can see a little bit more. Then there's the remorseful period, and there's often a lot of promises. This will never happen again. I won't do this to you again. I'm so sorry. I love you. You're the only person in the world for me. Thank you for understanding me. Nobody understands me like you do. Our love is so unique and special. We are meant to be together. We're soulmates, all of those types of things. And that kind of rolls into that honeymoon phase where things seem really, really wonderful. And like you've maybe got the partner that you originally thought you were going to have at the beginning of the relationship. So then things start to escalate and build up again. And then we go into that build up phase where there's more tension, irritability. So it's this very cyclical pattern. As far as the personality profile of someone who's abusive, what I have observed is, like we were talking about, the lack of taking responsibility, the lack of empathy, kind of playing the victim, someone who's controlling and possessive, someone who's typically pretty entitled, thinks that they are above others, or that they deserve special treatment or are entitled to special treatment, whether that's from you or elsewhere. These are all important behavioral patterns to pay attention to. And I know that there's a lot of buzz around the term narcissist and narcissistic abuse. And then of course, sociopaths and that type of thing. But what I think is important to know is that you can actually experience an abusive relationship without your partner having a diagnosed personality disorder. And someone can actually be very abusive without meeting that full criteria, or just hitting on, a few of the symptoms of one of those personality disorders.
Mm. Wow, that sounds a little scary, right? I mean, it's like, yeah.
I know
So,
it's a lot to digest, and especially if you're just coming around to what may be going on in your relationship. A lot of this information can be pretty painful and heavy to start to process. So I think for people to just sort of digest it as they can, it's a lot to get your mind around at first.
yeah. What are some of the techniques that you recommend, or anything that you can recommend for working toward, like, for someone that's just having the awareness and hasn't been exposed to this kind of work, before?
Sure. So I think that the psychoeducation is huge. So understanding what is happening in the relationship dynamic from a more objective standpoint is critical, because these relationships are so tangled, they feel so tangled and confusing. The more we can sort of educate ourselves and understand the patterns in general, the better equipped we are to navigate it, so that we don't get pulled into sort of this unhealthy, distorted way of viewing things. So I think that part is first, is really starting to face the reality of what's going on in the relationship and in the dynamic, versus the tendency to want to sort of bury our head in the sand and not look at it because we know it's going to be difficult work. I think recognizing the toll that the relationship has taken on us in terms of like starting to move forward and doing the work around healing and strengthening ourselves so that we do have the ability to get healthier and stronger and not go back into the relationship, right? And recognizing our value and that we do not deserve to be mistreated. That part is really, really critical in terms of healing.
Mhm. What are some of the repercussions that people face when they've been in a relationship like this, like the damage that they experience, perhaps psychologically or emotionally?
Oh, absolutely. And this is the heartbreaking piece is what it does to a person, especially the longer you've been in one of these relationships. So depression and anxiety, I mean, that's almost inevitable as a result of the powerlessness that a person feels in a dynamic that's like this. Um, Certainly, eating disorders are common. Addiction becomes more common. So, these are ways of coping with the stress, coping with the sense of powerlessness. They provide an escape, right? Even though it's an unhealthy escape, it's a way to cope with the pain. Um, so. Um, Physical manifestations of the emotional stress are common. So you see more like uh, obviously PTSD is common. IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is common. Migraines are more common. Some of these actual physical manifestations of the stress that we're under are much more common.
Mhm. And one, I'm asking, I'm not, I'm not an expert in this field at all, but I would assume isolation, like from community, from friends, family, hiding.
Absolutely. It's huge. It's huge because, not only are you dealing with the wedge that the abuser has potentially put between you and your support system, which is very effective in terms of disempowering you, right? If you're you know away from the people who love and support you, you're more vulnerable and you're easier to control. So the isolation piece is huge, but also the isolation that comes from feeling worse and worse about yourself. When you start to believe that you're a terrible person, or that you're a mess, or that you're um, unworthy of being in a good relationship or having others value you. That's another level of isolation. So a lot of times then we retreat and become more and more of a shell.
Mhm. And what can you offer to those that feel like leaving is not an option for them, whether they have families or whatever their reasons might be?
Yes, I'm glad you asked this because this is so important. A lot of times people will feel like it's not safe to leave for one reason or another, or that they can't leave for a variety of reasons. This is quite common. So, what I would recommend is that the person do everything possible to strengthen themselves internally. So, doing the things that make them feel connected to themselves within, finding joy in the things that make them connect to maybe who they were before the relationship, or who they want to be moving forward. So a lot of healing work can come from even just recognizing the trauma and learning to tend to yourself and what you might need um, just in terms of your own healing, and then setting firmer boundaries within the relationship. Now, sometimes this can be dangerous if the abuser escalates the abuse when you set a boundary. So if it's not safe to actually set the boundary with the abuser, even setting that boundary internally so that you know, okay, what this person is telling me is not accurate. I know that this isn't right. I know that this is a symptom of the abusive dynamic in general, and I'm not going to take this on. So you sort of give yourself that psychological protection, and you establish that boundary within yourself so that you're less likely to be hurt from it and take it on.
Hmm. I wonder if in the book, because I haven't had a chance to read it yet, are there strategies and tactics to dealing with, a manipulative abuser? Because I imagine that it can feel very risky to, like, for example, set those boundaries as you just mentioned, and just other strategies and tips.
Sure, absolutely. And this kind of dovetails with what you were asking earlier in terms of, is there hope for a relationship or a hope for change in the dynamic? So, one of the things that I recommend is when you do set a boundary, when you do start to notice the unhealthy patterns, how does your partner respond to that? So if your partner escalates with the punishment when you set a boundary and things become, unbearable, they become worse, that type of thing, that is important information to pay attention to, because it means it's less likely that the relationship is actually going to be able to get to a healthy place. Versus when you start to notice some of these unhealthy patterns and you start to talk to your partner about it and you start to establish some healthy boundaries, if your partner is willing to accommodate you and make room for you in the relationship and support you in your growth, then that's a relationship that has the potential to potentially move through, some of these unhealthy patterns. And again, in an abusive relationship, I want to say that that's the exception, not the rule. If you've got a partner who's behaving abusively to you, to be able to sit down and work through it and have your partner understand and communicate in a healthy way and set boundaries and have those boundaries respected, that is certainly the exception to the rule, not the rule. So if you can't get there, that's not a failure of communication on your part. That's just a symptom of the abusive dynamic in general. When we're dealing with somebody who is more controlling and aggressive, they typically really, really want that sort of ownership or proximity or closeness to you. So when you're communicating with them, if they don't have much empathy, you're not going to get very far when you tell them how their behavior makes you feel. So you're more likely to get the results that you want if you use language like, when you say that to me, it makes me want to pull away from you. Or when you behave that way, it makes me not want to be around you. So that there's a direct consequence to that behavior that the abuser doesn't like. You're going to pull away. Versus when our partner does something that makes us feel more connected to them in our relationship. I mean, even in a healthy relationship, for us to communicate, hey, that feels really good to me when you do this, and it makes me want to be closer to you. It makes me feel more connected to you. So when you kind of establish some of this with your partner in terms of how their behavior makes you want to be closer in proximity to them physically or emotionally, that becomes something that is in their best interest. And so they're more likely to pay attention to what you're saying.
Yeah, I love that strategy. It's like sneaky in a good way.